The cold arrived early in the small town, and it did not leave politely. It stayed. It pressed against windows. It turned car doors stiff. It made people walk faster and talk less. Snow fell in slow waves and covered the streets, the yards, and the fences until everything looked the same. Most families stayed close to their heaters and tried not to think about how long winter could feel. At the edge of town, past the last row of tidy houses, stood a place that everyone noticed but no one liked to mention. It was a strange house with dark wood, a narrow shape, and windows that looked uneven, like they had been placed by someone who did not care about symmetry. The roof dipped in one corner. The porch leaned a little. The front door had heavy iron hinges that looked too serious for a simple home. People called it the cold house. Some said it was built wrong. Some said the wind lived inside it. Some said the house never stayed warm, even in summer. Most people agreed on one thing. No sensible person would buy it, especially not in the worst winter the town had seen in years. That was why the talk began the moment Lena signed the papers. The news spread like it always did, fast and loud, jumping from phone to phone and from one store line to another. At the grocery store, two women paused beside the bread shelf and stared at each other. "She bought that place," one said. "The cold house," the other replied, like the words were a warning. At the library where Lena worked, a man returned his books and asked the front desk worker, "Is it true she moved out there?" He did not ask out of care. He asked like he was watching a mistake unfold. Lena heard small pieces of it all week. She heard them in the soft way people spoke when they thought she was too far away. She heard them in the careful way some people smiled at her, like they were being kind to someone who did not know better. Some neighbors laughed openly. Others tried to help, or at least they told themselves they were helping. One evening, after Lena closed the library, her co-worker Mina walked beside her in the parking lot. The air cut through their coats. "Lena," Mina said, pulling her scarf higher, "I need to ask you something. Are you sure about this house?" Lena unlocked her car and looked up at the gray sky. Snow was starting again. "Yes," she said. Mina frowned. "People say it is impossible to heat. People say it has problems. Big problems." Lena's fingers paused on the car door handle. "People say many things." Mina sighed. "I just do not want you to get stuck." Lena gave a small polite smile. "I have been stuck before. This is not that." Mina wanted to ask more, but the look on Lena's face stopped her. It was not angry. It was calm and firm. Mina nodded and stepped back, letting the conversation end. Lena drove away with the heater on low and her hands steady on the wheel. The road toward the edge of town was mostly empty. The snow made everything quiet, like the world had been wrapped in thick cloth. She had saved for years without telling anyone what she planned. She lived in a small rental with thin walls and a landlord who fixed nothing unless he was forced. She worked extra shifts, skipped unnecessary spending, and kept a small notebook where she wrote numbers and goals. She did not do it to impress anyone. She did it because she wanted a place that belonged to her, a place no one could take away with a sudden notice or a raised rent. When she first saw the cold house, she did not feel fear. She felt something else, something hard to explain. She felt like the house was waiting. Not in a magical way, but in a quiet human way, like an old chair waiting for someone to sit down and finally rest. The moving day arrived with a bitter wind and a sky the color of old paper. The town looked frozen in place. The moving truck groaned as it climbed the small hill toward the house. Lena's small car followed behind it. A few neighbors in nearby homes watched from their windows. They did not wave. They did not come out. They just watched, like this was a show. The driver stepped down and rubbed his hands together. "You sure this is the right address?" Lena nodded. "This is it." He looked at the house and made a face. "Feels colder just looking at it." Lena did not respond. She walked up the porch steps carefully because ice had formed along the edges. She unlocked the front door. The iron hinge gave a low sound as the door opened. Inside, the air was cold, but it was not as bad as people claimed. It smelled like dust and old wood. The hallway was narrow. The floorboards creaked, but they did not feel weak. The walls had small marks where pictures once hung. Lena stood still for a moment and listened. The house was silent, but not in a scary way. More like a place that had been empty for too long. She turned on a small lamp she had carried in first. Warm light filled part of the hallway. The shadows pulled back. The driver and his helper carried boxes inside and left them in the living room. They kept glancing around, like they expected something to jump out. Lena stayed focused. She directed the boxes, thanked them, and moved on. When the truck finally left, the quiet returned. Lena closed the door and stood in the middle of the living room. Snow tapped softly against the windows. Wind hissed outside. This room had a stone fireplace and a wooden mantel. Above the mantel was a faded line where a mirror had been. The floor had scratches, but it was clean. She had already scrubbed parts of the house on earlier visits. She had already learned which windows needed new ceiling and which doors needed better weather strips. She had brought tools and supplies. People thought she bought the house without thinking. That was the part that made her almost laugh. Lena had thought about it more than anyone. She started unpacking slowly. She placed her coat on the back of a chair. She opened a box labeled kitchen and carried it to the next room. The kitchen was small and old, but the cabinets were solid. The counters were scratched. The sink was deep. A window above the sink faced the yard, where snow covered the ground like a smooth sheet. Lena opened another box and took out a kettle. She set it on the stove even though the stove was not new. She checked the pilot and the connection she had inspected before. It was fine. Then she walked back to the hallway and stopped in front of a door near the stairs. This door was different. It was thicker. It had a newer lock than the rest of the house. She took out a key from her ring and tried it. The lock turned smoothly. The door opened. A narrow stairway went down. The air from below was warmer than the air in the hallway. Not hot, but clearly warmer. That was strange, because the house had been empty. Lena stepped down carefully. Her boots made soft sounds on the steps. At the bottom was a small room, lit by a single bulb. The walls were insulated. The floor was clean. In the center of the room sat something that did not belong in an old cold house. It looked modern. It was a heating unit, but not the kind most people used. Beside it were thick pipes and a small control panel with buttons and a screen. On the wall was a binder in a plastic sleeve. Lena picked up the binder and opened it. Inside were notes, instructions, diagrams, careful handwriting. Someone had built this system with patience and skill. Lena's lips pressed into a small, thoughtful smile. So that was it. That was the reason the house had been sold quietly. That was the reason it had not been destroyed or forgotten. The cold house was not cold at all. Not anymore. Lena turned the control panel on. The screen lit up. The unit hummed softly. Warm air began to move through vents she had not noticed upstairs. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the steady sound. Above her, the wind could scream all it wanted. The snow could pile high. The town could keep whispering. Inside this house, something had been hidden in plain sight. And Lena had a feeling that once people found out what was really inside, the mocking would stop fast. The next morning arrived slowly and quietly. Snow had fallen all night and the world outside the cold house looked clean and untouched. The sky was pale and the sun hid behind thin clouds. Smoke rose from Lena's chimney in a steady, calm line. It was the first time in many years that anyone nearby had seen that sight. Inside the house, Lena woke before her alarm. The room was warm. Not heavy warm, but comfortable. The kind of warmth that let the body rest instead of fighting the air. She lay still for a moment and listened. No rattling windows. No whistling wind. Just silence and the soft sound of heat moving through the walls. She sat up and smiled. Lena moved through the house slowly, still learning its shape. She made tea in the kitchen and stood by the window, watching the snow sparkle faintly. Her breath did not fog the glass. That detail mattered to her more than she expected. Outside, the town was waking up. Cars started. Doors opened. People stepped onto their porches and noticed the smoke from her chimney. At first, no one said anything. They just stared longer than usual. At the small cafe near the main road, the early crowd gathered as always. Coats hung heavy on chair backs. Hands wrapped around hot cups. "Did you see the house on the hill?" a man asked. "The cold house," another replied. "There was smoke coming out of it this morning." A woman shook her head. "That cannot be right." "It was," the man said. "I drove past it." They exchanged looks that mixed confusion and doubt. Later that day, Lena went into town for groceries. She walked calmly, her boots crunching softly on packed snow. People noticed her more than before. A few nodded. A few stared. One man near the produce section cleared his throat and spoke. "Warm enough out there?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Lena met his eyes. "Cold outside. Warm inside." That was all she said. The words traveled faster than she did. By the afternoon, curiosity grew heavier than the snow. A neighbor named Ron stood across the street from the cold house pretending to brush snow from his steps while watching the windows. They glowed with a steady light. No flicker. No signs of struggle. Ron had lived in the town for decades. He knew stories. He knew rumors. And he knew when something did not add up. That evening, he crossed the road with slow, careful steps and stopped at Lena's porch. He hesitated, then knocked. Lena opened the door and felt a small wave of surprise. Visitors were not common for her. "Yes," she said. Ron cleared his throat. "I live across the street. Just wanted to welcome you." "Thank you," Lena replied. He glanced past her shoulder into the hallway. "Feels warm in there." "It is," Lena said. Ron shifted his weight. "People said that place could never hold heat." "They were wrong," Lena said simply. There was no pride in her voice. Just truth. Ron nodded slowly. "Well, if you need anything." "I appreciate that." He walked away with more questions than answers. That night, Lena worked in the basement again. She checked the system carefully. She read the binder page by page. The notes told a quiet story. A former owner. Someone skilled. Someone who had built a deep heating system using the ground itself. It was designed to store warmth and release it slowly. Efficient. Quiet. Almost invisible. The system had been expensive to build, but cheap to run. It was hidden well. Too well. Lena understood then why the house had been sold the way it was. The family who owned it before had left suddenly. There were no details. No one had bothered to ask. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and sadness. Gratitude for the gift she had unknowingly bought. Sadness for the hands that built it and never got credit. The next few days passed with steady cold outside and steady warmth inside. Snowstorms came and went. Pipes burst in other homes. Power went out in parts of town. People complained loudly. The cold house stayed calm. One night, during a heavy storm, the lights flickered across the street. Houses went dark one by one. Lena's lights stayed on. Her heat stayed steady. From their windows, neighbors watched. Some in disbelief. Some with growing respect. By morning, the story had changed. People no longer laughed. They wondered. At the library, Lena noticed the shift. Conversations stopped when she walked by. Not in a cruel way. In a curious way. A man approached her desk. "Is it true your house stayed warm during the storm?" "Yes," Lena said. "How?" She smiled politely. "Good planning." That answer spread too. Soon, Questions turned into admiration. The same people who mocked her now said she was smart. They said she saw something others missed. They said the house was lucky to have her. Lena listened and said little. She had learned something important. People did not change because truth appeared. They changed because comfort returned. One afternoon, Mina visited. She stood in the living room, eyes wide, coat still on. "It is so warm," Mina said. "I do not understand." Lena poured tea and handed her a cup. "I told you I was sure," Lena said gently. Mina laughed softly. "I should have trusted you." Lena looked around her home. Boxes were unpacked now. A rug lay by the fireplace. Plants sat near the windows. "This place feels alive," Mina said. "It was waiting," Lena replied. Outside, the snow began to fall again. But this time, no one doubted the house. They watched it with new eyes. They did not know yet that the warmth inside was only part of the story. There was something else hidden in the cold house. Something that would change more than just winter. As winter deepened, the town settled into a routine of cold mornings and long nights. Snowbanks grew higher along the roads. People complained about heating bills and broken systems. Yet the cold house stayed steady and calm. Its windows glowed each evening like a quiet promise. The house no longer felt strange. It felt confident. Lena adjusted to her new life with careful steps. She woke early and worked at the library during the day. In the evenings she returned home and cooked simple meals. She read books by the fire and listened to the wind without fear. The house responded to her presence as if it had been waiting for someone patient. Curiosity continued to grow. People stopped by more often. Not in crowds. One at a time. A neighbor with a broken heater. A young couple who lost power during a storm. An older woman who needed a warm place to sit for an hour. Lena did not announce anything. She did not invite the town inside. But when someone asked for help, she opened her door. Ron was the first to step fully inside. He came one afternoon carrying a small box of tools. "I thought you might need these," he said. Lena thanked him and invited him in. He removed his coat and looked around slowly. The warmth surprised him again. "You know," Ron said, "people are talking. They say your house does not act like it should." Lena smiled lightly. "Houses follow the care they are given." Ron nodded as if that made sense. He noticed the neat shelves, the clean floors, the calm feeling. "You fixed this place," he said. "I listened to it," Lena replied. Ron did not fully understand, but he respected the answer. A few days later, during another heavy storm, the town lost power again. This time it lasted longer. The roads were blocked. The temperature dropped fast. People gathered at the town center where emergency heat was set up, but space was limited. Lena heard the news on her small radio. She thought for a moment. Then she made a decision. She turned on extra lights and placed chairs in the living room. She brewed tea and set out blankets. She did not put up a sign. She did not call anyone. She simply opened her door. Word spread quietly. Someone knocked. Then another. Soon a small group stood inside the cold house, surprised and relieved. They warmed their hands and sat in silence at first. No one mocked anything anymore. An older man named Paul spoke softly. "I never thought this place would save us." Lena handed him a cup. Places change when people do. The room filled with calm voices. People shared stories about winters past. About mistakes. About homes they lost. The cold house held them all without complaint. In the basement, the heating system worked steadily. Lena checked it often. She followed the notes carefully. She treated the system with respect. She began to realize something important. The system was designed not just for one house. It was powerful enough to support more. The idea settled in her mind slowly. She did not rush it. She read the binder again. She studied the diagrams. The former owner had planned something bigger. Something generous. A shared warmth. Lena spent nights thinking. She spoke with Mina. She asked questions at the library. She researched quietly. By midwinter, she had a plan. She started with small steps. She invited the town electrician to look at the system. She asked careful questions without revealing everything. She learned what was possible. The electrician shook his head in disbelief. This is advanced. Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing. He cared, Lena said. The man nodded. That much is clear. The next storm hit harder than the others. Roads closed. Power lines failed. The town center filled beyond capacity. Panic spread. This time, Lena did not wait. She walked to the town office and spoke calmly. She explained what her house could do. She offered help. At first, they doubted her. Then they remembered the nights her house stayed warm while theirs went cold. They followed her. Cables were laid carefully. Temporary connections were made. The cold house shared its stored warmth with nearby buildings. Not all. Just enough. The town felt it almost immediately. People gathered outside and watched as heaters came back to life. They looked at Lena differently now. Not as someone strange. Not as someone lucky. As someone prepared. In the following days, the story of the cold house changed again. It was no longer about mocking or shock. It became a story about foresight. About care. About someone who trusted quiet knowledge over loud opinion. Lena stayed the same. She did not seek praise. She worked alongside others. She cleaned. She carried supplies. She listened more than she spoke. One evening, Mina stood beside her near the fireplace. You know, Mina said, you changed this town. Lena shook her head gently. The town was always here. She looked around the room filled with people resting and talking. They just needed warmth to remember it. Outside, the snow fell softly. Inside, the cold house did what it was meant to do. And deep within its walls, a hidden purpose finally came alive. Winter began to loosen its grip, but it did not leave quietly. The cold still returned at night, sharp and sudden, testing the town one last time. By now, the cold house was no longer a joke. It had become a place people trusted. They spoke its name with care. Lena felt the change everywhere she went. People greeted her with honest smiles. They asked how she was doing, not out of curiosity but respect. The town felt closer than before, like warmth had done more than heat rooms. It had softened hearts. Work began on a careful plan to make the shared heating safer and more stable. The town council met often. They asked Lena to attend. She sat at the long table and listened. She spoke only when needed. The system can help, she said. But it must be protected. It must be understood. They agreed. A small team formed. Electricians, builders, planners. They worked around the cold house with patience. They followed Lena's notes. They read the old binder together. The handwriting felt like a voice from the past guiding their steps. During this time, Lena discovered more about the former owner. His name was Aaron. He had lived quietly. He had studied energy and believed warmth should be shared. He built the system slowly over many years. When his family moved away, the house was sold quickly. No one asked what was hidden inside. Lena placed a small photo she found in the binder on a shelf. It showed Aaron standing beside the house, smiling softly. She felt a quiet promise form inside her. She would honor the work. As the days passed, people came not only for warmth but to help. Someone brought soup. Someone fixed a loose step. Someone painted a railing. The cold house changed again. It became a place of movement and purpose. One evening, a young boy named Noah arrived with his mother. Their apartment had lost heat again. The boy's hands were red from the cold. Lena knelt and handed him a blanket. "You are safe here." He nodded and looked around. "This house feels like it is hugging me." Lena felt her throat tighten. She stood and turned toward the window, letting the feeling pass gently. The town newspaper asked for an interview. Lena declined. She did not want a story built on one person. She wanted it built on what people could do together. Still, the story spread beyond the town. Visitors arrived. Not crowds, but thoughtful people. Students. Builders. Quiet thinkers. They asked about the system. They asked about the house. Lena shared what she could. She showed them the care behind the work. She reminded them that nothing powerful should be rushed. Spring signs appeared slowly. Snow melted into streams. Roofs dripped under the sun. People opened windows for the first time in months. The cold house adjusted easily. It released stored warmth and rested. The system breathed, just as Aaron had designed. One afternoon, the town gathered in the open yard beside the house. Tables were set. Food was shared. Laughter rose into the air. It felt like a celebration, but not a loud one. A grounded one. Ron stood beside Lena. "You know," he said, "we almost lost this place." Lena nodded. "We almost lost more than that." Mina joined them. "What happens next?" Lena looked at the house, at the people, at the open sky. "We keep going," she said. "Together." Plans formed for the future. Training sessions. Shared resources. Emergency support. The cold house would remain the heart, but others would learn to build their own strength. As the sun set, lights came on inside the house. Warmth filled the rooms once more, not because it was needed, but because it was welcomed. Lena walked through the quiet rooms later that night. She touched the walls. She thanked them silently. She stood in the basement and checked the system one last time. It hummed softly, steady and content. The strange house was never strange at all. It was simply waiting for someone to listen. And now, the town had learned how. Spring settled fully into the town, gentle and patient. Snow disappeared from the streets and grass slowly returned to yards that had been buried for months. Windows stayed open longer. People walked without rushing. The season felt earned. The cold house stood strong at the edge of town, no longer lonely. Fresh paint brightened the porch. The steps were repaired. Flowers grew along the fence. What once felt ignored now felt watched over. Lena's life changed in small but steady ways. She still worked at the library. She still walked the same roads. But now, people stopped to talk. Not to ask questions, not to doubt, but to share ideas. The town council finished the long-term plan. Training sessions began. People learned how to build safer systems for their own homes. Not copies of the cold house, but inspired by it. Thoughtful, careful, built to last. Lena helped quietly. She guided when asked. She stepped back when needed. She believed leadership was about space, not control. One afternoon, she received a letter. It came from a nearby town. Someone had heard about the shared warmth. They asked for advice. They asked how to begin. Lena sat at her kitchen table and read the letter twice. Then she smiled. She wrote back with simple words. She explained the importance of patience, of listening to the land, of caring more about people than praise. Soon, more letters arrived. The idea moved gently from place to place. Not as a trend, as a lesson. The cold house became a quiet symbol, not of clever design, of trust. One evening, Lena stood in the living room alone. The windows were open. Warm air drifted in from outside. She did not need the heat now, but she turned the system on low anyway. Not for warmth, but for comfort. She thought about the winter. about the mocking, about the doubt. She did not feel anger. She felt understanding. People feared what they did not know. They laughed at what challenged them. But they learned when given time. In the basement, the system rested. It had done its work well. Lena placed the old binder back on the shelf. She added a new notebook beside it. Blank pages waited. She wrote the first line. This house taught us how to care. Months passed. Summer arrived softly. Children played near the yard. People sat on the porch and talked in the evenings. The cold house stayed open. Not as a shelter now, but as a meeting place. A reminder. One day, Noah returned. He ran up the steps, taller than before. He held a small drawing. "This is your house," he said proudly. Lena knelt and looked. He had drawn the house glowing, with lines reaching out to others. "It is a good house," he said. "It is," Lena replied. She placed the drawing on the wall near the stairs. As the year moved forward, the town grew stronger. Not richer. Not bigger. Stronger in quieter ways. People checked on each other more. They shared tools. They planned ahead. They remembered the winter and what saved them. Lena remained at the center without standing in front. She watched from the side, content. One evening, as the sun set in gold light, she sat on the porch steps. Ron and Mina joined her. They sat without speaking for a while. "Funny how things turn out," Ron said. "Yes," Mina agreed. "We almost missed it." Lena looked at the house. "We did not miss it," she said gently. "We found it when we were ready." The lights came on inside. Warmth filled the rooms quietly. Not because it was needed, but because it belonged. The strange house in the freezing cold had never been strange. It was wise. And because one woman listened instead of doubted, an entire town learned how to stand together.